The conference room at Tech Vantage Solutions fell silent when Jackson Morrison, the founder's son, looked directly at me and delivered the words that would change everything. "We're a family here, so your stock options are canceled," he said, with that smug smile he'd perfected over the past 2 years since taking over operations. I simply nodded, watching him bask in what he thought was his moment of triumph. 3 weeks later, at the $350 million acquisition signing with Global Tech Industries, their lead counsel suddenly stopped mid-sentence while reviewing documents. "The cap table shows a majority shareholder isn't in this room," he announced, confusion creeping into his voice. He looked around the mahogany conference table at Jackson's carefully assembled inner circle, then back at his papers. That's when I stepped forward from the back corner where I'd been quietly observing. My journey with Tech Vantage began 8 years ago when founder Robert Morrison recruited me straight from Stanford Business School to help launch his cybersecurity startup in Austin, Texas. Fresh out of my MBA program with a concentration in technology ventures, I believed I was joining a company that would revolutionize how mid-sized businesses protected their digital assets. Robert painted a vision of democratic leadership and shared ownership, promising that early employees who helped build the company would be rewarded with meaningful equity stakes. During those first 3 years, I threw myself into every aspect of the business with the dedication of someone who truly believed she was building something special. My marketing background proved invaluable as we developed our flagship product, Secure Shield Pro, a comprehensive cybersecurity platform designed specifically for companies with 50 to 500 employees. I crafted our entire go-to-market strategy, from identifying target customer segments to developing pricing models that made enterprise-level security affordable for smaller organizations. Working 18-hour days became my normal routine as I juggled multiple responsibilities that would typically require entire departments. I designed our customer acquisition funnel, managed relationships with technology partners, and even helped Robert refine the technical specifications for our software based on feedback from early adopters. My efforts directly resulted in landing our first major client, a regional bank chain, that signed a 2-year contract worth $800,000. Robert recognized my contributions by granting me stock options that would vest over 4 years, with the promise of additional grants based on company performance milestones. The documentation seemed straightforward at the time. I would own 4.7% of the company once fully vested, with accelerated vesting triggers if we achieved certain revenue targets or underwent a major liquidity event like an acquisition or public offering. But everything changed when Robert suffered a massive heart attack during our 4th year of operations. At 62, he had never prepared succession planning beyond informal conversations about eventually bringing in professional management. His recovery required extensive rehabilitation, and the day-to-day operations fell to Jackson, who had recently completed his MBA at Wharton and possessed an inflated sense of his own capabilities. Jackson's first major decision revealed his true character and set the stage for years of systematic manipulation. During a company-wide meeting ostensibly called to discuss Robert's recovery timeline, Jackson announced that he would be implementing operational efficiency measures to ensure continued growth. These measures included restructuring the equity compensation program to better align incentives with current market conditions. The restructuring involved converting existing stock options into performance-based grants that required meeting increasingly unrealistic targets. Jackson presented this as beneficial to employees, claiming it would result in larger payouts for top performers, while eliminating rewards for those who weren't fully committed to the company's success. The legal documentation was complex enough that most employees, including myself, didn't immediately recognize how dramatically it reduced our potential ownership stakes. Over the following months, Jackson systematically marginalized the contributions of early employees while bringing in his own network of contacts from business school and previous consulting work. He hired expensive external consultants to review strategies I had already developed and implemented successfully, then credited these consultants with innovations that were actually improvements to my original frameworks. The most devastating blow came when I discovered Jackson had been meeting privately with potential acquirers without informing the existing team. Through a combination of industry connections and careful observation, I learned that global tech industries had been courting TechVantage for over a year, with Jackson positioning himself as the visionary leader responsible for the company's success, while downplaying the contributions of founding team members. This revelation forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth about the stock option grants Robert had promised. The legal documents contained provisions that allowed for cancellation under certain circumstances, including restructuring for operational efficiency or alignment with new strategic directions. Jackson had been systematically creating justifications for invoking these provisions, effectively stealing the equity that early employees had earned through years of dedication and hard work. Jackson's campaign to eliminate my influence accelerated dramatically during our 6th year of operations. What began as subtle marginalization evolved into open hostility disguised as corporate restructuring. The transformation was methodical and calculated, designed to make my position so uncomfortable that I would resign voluntarily, forfeiting any remaining claims to equity compensation. The first wave of attacks targeted my professional responsibilities and decision-making authority. Jackson hired Marina Castellanos, a former McKinsey consultant with an MBA from Northwestern, to serve as chief marketing officer. This effectively demoted me from leading marketing strategy to executing campaigns developed by someone with no understanding of our industry or customer base. Marina's appointment came with a salary $50,000 higher than mine, despite my 8 years of experience building the department from 0 employees to a team of 12 professionals. Marina immediately began questioning every system and process I had established over nearly a decade. She demanded detailed documentation justifying marketing expenditures that had consistently delivered strong returns on investment, claiming she needed to audit legacy programs for efficiency optimization. Her approach ignored the relationships I had cultivated with technology publications, industry analysts, and customer advocacy groups that provided TechVantage with credibility far beyond our actual size. The most frustrating aspect of Marina's oversight involved her insistence on implementing trendy marketing techniques that were completely inappropriate for our business model. She pushed for expensive social media influencer partnerships, despite our target customers being chief information officers and cybersecurity directors, who made purchasing decisions based on technical capabilities rather than lifestyle branding. When I explained why these approaches wouldn't work for enterprise software sales, Marina dismissed my concerns as resistance to innovative thinking. Meanwhile, Jackson began excluding me from strategic planning meetings where important decisions about company direction were being made. I learned about major product development initiatives through casual conversations with engineering team members rather than official communications. My exclusion from these discussions meant I couldn't provide input on marketing implications of new features or services, resulting in product launches that failed to resonate with our target market. The financial impact of these changes became apparent when our customer acquisition costs increased by 35%, while conversion rates decreased significantly. Potential customers who had previously trusted TechVantage based on our reputation for understanding their specific challenges began questioning whether we still understood their needs. Several longtime clients expressed concern about the direction of our marketing messages, which had shifted from practical solutions to generic technology buzzwords. Jackson's response to these declining metrics was to blame the marketing team for poor execution rather than acknowledge that Marina's strategies were fundamentally flawed. He instituted weekly performance review meetings where Marina would present elaborate presentations about marketing funnel optimization while glossing over the fact that actual results were getting worse. These meetings became exercises in corporate theater where style mattered more than substance. The personal toll of this situation extended beyond professional frustration into genuine financial anxiety. My equity compensation had been structured to vest over time, with the largest portions scheduled to vest during years 7 and 8 of my employment. Jackson's restructuring meant that achieving these equity milestones required meeting performance targets that had become nearly impossible under Marina's mismanagement of the marketing department. Most painfully, I watched as Jackson gradually erased evidence of my foundational contributions to the company's success. The customer case studies that featured my strategic work were rewritten to emphasize product features rather than marketing innovation. Industry awards that TechVantage had won based on campaigns I designed were now attributed to team collaboration rather than individual achievement. Jackson even had our website redesigned to remove biographical information about early employees, replacing it with generic team descriptions that made it appear as though the current leadership had been responsible for all historical accomplishments. The culmination of this systematic erasure came when Jackson announced that TechVantage would be participating in a major cybersecurity conference where I had previously served as our primary spokesperson. Instead of allowing me to present the innovative customer retention strategies that had become industry benchmarks, Jackson assigned Marina to deliver a presentation about next-generation marketing approaches in the cybersecurity sector. The irony was devastating. Marina would be presenting concepts she didn't understand to an audience that included customers who had worked directly with me to develop those same approaches. My breaking point came during a particularly humiliating team meeting where Jackson announced that Global Tech Industries had expressed interest in acquiring TechVantage. He presented this as exciting news that would provide growth opportunities for dedicated team members, while simultaneously making it clear that equity participation would be limited to those who had demonstrated alignment with current strategic vision. The subtext was unmistakable. Employees who had been marginalized under his leadership would be excluded from the financial benefits of any acquisition. That evening, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of everything that followed. Instead of accepting defeat or confronting Jackson directly, I chose to investigate the legal foundation of my equity claims with the thoroughness of someone fighting for her professional life. My undergraduate degree in finance had included coursework in corporate law, and I had maintained relationships with several attorneys from my business school network who specialized in startup equity disputes. The first person I contacted was Jennifer Martinez, a securities attorney who had graduated 2 years ahead of me at Stanford and now practiced corporate law in San Francisco. Jennifer agreed to review my employment documentation and stock option agreements on a contingency basis, recognizing that if significant irregularities existed, the potential financial recovery could justify her investment of time and resources. Jennifer's analysis revealed several disturbing patterns in how Jackson had restructured the equity compensation program. The modifications he had implemented were technically legal under the broad language of the original stock option plan, but they violated the spirit of representations that Robert Morrison had made to early employees. More importantly, Some of Jackson's changes appeared to have been backdated to create the appearance of board approval for decisions that had actually been made unilaterally. The most significant discovery emerged when Jennifer obtained corporate filings that TechVantage was required to submit with the Texas Secretary of State. These documents showed that Jackson had issued himself additional shares and modified the company's capitalization structure without following proper procedures for shareholder notification. The paperwork indicated that Jackson now owned 32% of the company, while the original employee stock option pool had been diluted to represent only 8% of total outstanding shares. But Jennifer's investigation uncovered something even more significant. Robert Morrison, despite his health challenges, remained the majority shareholder of TechVantage with 51% ownership. Jackson had been operating under the assumption that his father's medical situation gave him effective control of those shares, but the corporate documents showed no evidence of a power of attorney or other legal transfer of voting rights. This revelation prompted Jennifer to arrange a discreet meeting with Robert Morrison at his rehabilitation facility. Despite his physical limitations, Robert's mental faculties remained completely intact, and he was shocked to learn about Jackson's equity manipulations. Robert had been receiving sanitized updates about company operations that portrayed Jackson as successfully managing a smooth transition with no mention of the systematic elimination of early employee equity stakes. Robert's reaction was immediate and decisive. He had always intended for TechVantage to reward the employees who had risked their careers to help build the company, and Jackson's actions violated everything Robert believed about ethical business practices. Within 2 weeks, Robert had signed legal documents formally transferring his 51% ownership stake to me with instructions to use this control to protect the interests of founding team members. The transfer included a personal letter from Robert explaining his decision. He wrote that watching Jackson's behavior had convinced him that his son lacked the character necessary to lead a company built on trust and collaboration. Robert believed that I had demonstrated the values and business judgment necessary to guide TechVantage through whatever challenges lay ahead, whether that involved remaining independent or pursuing an acquisition that fairly compensated everyone who had contributed to the company's success. Jennifer helped me understand the strategic implications of this ownership transfer. As the majority shareholder, I had the legal authority to approve or reject any proposed acquisition, regardless of Jackson's preferences. I could also call special meetings of the board of directors, review all contracts and agreements, and ensure that any transaction properly valued the contributions of early employees. Most importantly, I now controlled the timing and terms of any potential sale to Global Tech Industries. Jackson had been negotiating from a position where he believed he could structure the transaction to maximize his personal benefit while minimizing payouts to other equity holders. The acquisition discussions had been proceeding under assumptions about company ownership that were completely incorrect. The challenge would be revealing this information at the optimal moment to achieve maximum impact. Jennifer advised me to remain quiet about the ownership transfer until Jackson had committed himself to specific terms with Global Tech. This would prevent him from modifying his approach or attempting to renegotiate the deal structure once he learned about the changed ownership dynamics. The 3 weeks leading up to the acquisition signing were among the most surreal of my professional life. I continued performing my diminished responsibilities while watching Jackson orchestrate what he believed would be his greatest triumph. His confidence had reached almost comedic levels as he spoke about the strategic vision that had attracted Global Tech's interest, taking credit for innovations and customer relationships that had been developed years before his active involvement in company operations. Marina had become Jackson's enthusiastic partner in rewriting TechVantage's history, to minimize the contributions of early employees. She produced elaborate presentations for global tech executives that portrayed the current leadership team as the primary drivers of company success, while describing previous strategies as foundational work that required professional refinement. The presentations featured carefully selected metrics that supported this narrative while ignoring customer retention data and revenue growth patterns that demonstrated the effectiveness of earlier marketing approaches. Jackson's preparation for the acquisition included restructuring employment agreements to ensure that key personnel would remain with the company under Global Tech's ownership. However, these agreements were designed to benefit only those employees Jackson considered essential to his continued leadership role. The retention packages excluded me and several other founding team members, creating a clear message about who would be valued in the post-acquisition organization. The most revealing aspect of Jackson's behavior during this period was his assumption that equity holders would passively accept whatever terms he negotiated. He made casual comments about the acquisition providing appropriate compensation for early employees, while simultaneously working with Marina to ensure that my contributions would not be highlighted in discussions with global tech executives. Jackson appeared to believe that my marginalized position meant I had no leverage to influence the transaction terms. Meanwhile, I used this time to thoroughly understand global tech's strategic objectives and evaluate whether an acquisition truly represented the best outcome for TechVantage stakeholders. Jennifer arranged for me to meet confidentially with industry analysts and former global tech employees who could provide insights into the company's track record with acquisitions. These conversations revealed that global tech had a history of successful integrations that preserved the culture and capabilities of acquired companies. The financial terms Jackson had negotiated appeared reasonable on the surface. $350 million for a company with annual revenues of $42 million represented a healthy multiple that reflected TechVantage's growth potential and strategic value to global tech's cybersecurity portfolio. However, the proposed allocation of proceeds heavily favored Jackson's equity stake, while providing minimal compensation to other shareholders, including employees, whose stock options had been systematically devalued through his restructuring efforts. Jennifer's analysis of the proposed transaction documents revealed several provisions that would allow Jackson to receive additional payouts based on post-acquisition performance milestones, effectively double compensating him for company achievements that had been accomplished through the collective efforts of the entire team. These earnout provisions were structured in a way that made Jackson appear indispensable to global tech's integration plans. More troubling was evidence that Jackson had been providing global tech with inaccurate information about the company's customer relationships and competitive positioning. He had claimed personal responsibility for landing major clients and maintaining strategic partnerships that predated his operational involvement. This misrepresentation could potentially expose TechVantage to legal liability if Global Tech discovered the truth after completing the acquisition. The week before the scheduled signing, Jackson held a company-wide meeting to announce the acquisition and outline transition plans. His presentation emphasized the exciting opportunities that Global Tech's resources would provide, while glossing over details about how existing employees would be affected. When questions arose about equity compensation and retention packages, Jackson provided vague assurances about taking care of everyone who contributed to our success, without offering specific details. I sat in the back of that meeting listening to Jackson describe his vision for the future while knowing that everything was about to change dramatically. Several longtime employees approached me afterward to express concern about their treatment under the new ownership structure. They had heard rumors about the selective retention packages and were worried about their job security following the acquisition. These conversations reinforced my conviction that revealing the true ownership structure was necessary to protect the interests of employees who had been loyal to TechVantage through years of challenging growth. Jackson's approach to the acquisition prioritized his personal benefit over the welfare of the team that had actually built the company's value. The night before the signing, I received a final update from Jennifer about the legal documentation Global Tech's attorneys had prepared. The transaction structure assumed that Jackson had the authority to approve the sale on behalf of all shareholders, which was legally impossible given Robert's retained ownership and my newly acquired majority position. The acquisition could not proceed without my explicit approval regardless of Jackson's preferences. The acquisition signing was scheduled for 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning in Global Tech's downtown Austin offices. Jackson had arranged for the meeting to take place in their executive conference room, a glass-walled space with panoramic views of the Colorado River that was designed to impress visiting executives and investment partners. He arrived 30 minutes early with Marina and 2 other senior staff members, clearly intending to control the narrative and demonstrate his leadership authority to Global Tech's acquisition team. I entered the building separately and positioned myself in the reception area where I could observe the proceedings without drawing attention. Jennifer had advised me to wait until Global Tech's legal counsel began reviewing the final documentation before revealing the ownership situation. This timing would prevent Jackson from attempting to postpone the meeting or modify the transaction structure once he realized his fundamental misunderstanding of the company's shareholder dynamics. Global Tech's team included Chief Executive Officer David Chen, Chief Financial Officer Sarah Williams, and their lead acquisitions attorney Michael Rodriguez. Rodriguez had extensive experience with technology acquisitions and was known for his meticulous attention to corporate governance details that could complicate transaction closings. His reputation for thoroughness made him the ideal person to identify the ownership discrepancies in TechVantage's documentation. Jackson began the meeting with his carefully rehearsed presentation about TechVantage's competitive advantages and growth potential under Global Tech's strategic guidance. He spoke confidently about customer relationships and product development roadmaps, taking credit for innovations that had been developed by other team members over several years. Marina supported his narrative with financial projections that assumed continued growth under their joint leadership. The first hour proceeded exactly as Jackson had planned, with Global Tech executives expressing enthusiasm about the strategic fit and asking detailed questions about integration timelines. Jackson handled their questions smoothly, painting himself as the visionary leader who had transformed Robert Morrison's startup into an acquisition-worthy company. His confidence appeared completely justified as both teams moved toward the document signing phase. Rodriguez began his legal review by examining the corporate governance documents that established each party's authority to complete the transaction. This process involved confirming that Jackson had proper authorization to sell TechVantage on behalf of all shareholders and that Global Tech's board had approved the acquisition terms. Standard due diligence required verification that no outstanding legal issues could prevent the transaction from closing. The moment of truth came when Rodriguez opened the updated capitalization table that Jennifer had prepared, showing TechVantage's current ownership structure. His expression shifted from routine professional focus to genuine confusion as he reviewed the shareholder list and voting control allocations. The documents clearly indicated that someone other than Jackson controlled the majority of voting shares, making Jackson's presence at the signing meeting insufficient to authorize the sale. "I need to clarify something before we proceed," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying the careful tone of an attorney who had identified a significant legal obstacle. The capitalization table shows a majority shareholder who isn't present in this room. According to these documents, Sandra Thompson controls 51% of voting shares, which means she has the authority to approve or reject this transaction regardless of management's recommendations. The silence that followed was deafening. Jackson's face went through several distinct emotional transitions as he processed the implications of Rodriguez's statement. Initial confusion gave way to disbelief, followed by a growing realization that his carefully orchestrated acquisition was suddenly in jeopardy. Marina looked equally bewildered, clearly unaware that Jackson's authority to negotiate on behalf of TechVantage had been based on an incorrect understanding of the ownership structure. David Chen and Sarah Williams exchanged glances that reflected their own professional experience with acquisition complications. They had encountered similar situations where management teams operated under mistaken assumptions about their authority to complete transactions, but the late discovery of these issues typically resulted in significant delays or complete deal failures. That's when I stepped forward from my position near the conference room entrance. Every person at the table turned to look at me, their expressions ranging from curiosity to alarm as they realized that someone had been observing the proceedings without their knowledge. Jackson's face displayed a combination of recognition and growing panic as he began to understand the full scope of his miscalculation. "I'm Sandra Thompson," I said calmly, addressing the global tech team directly. "I believe you have some questions about TechVantage's ownership structure that I can help clarify." The power dynamic in the room shifted instantly as everyone present realized that the person they had assumed was irrelevant to the transaction actually held ultimate decision-making authority. Jackson's attempt to maintain control of the situation revealed the full extent of his desperation and poor judgment. Rather than acknowledging the changed circumstances and attempting to negotiate a reasonable resolution, he launched into an aggressive challenge of my authority that exposed his character to everyone present. His first response was to claim that the ownership transfer documents were fraudulent and that I had manipulated his father during a period of medical vulnerability. "This is absolutely unacceptable!" Jackson declared, his voice rising to a level that was inappropriate for a professional meeting. "My father has been recovering from serious health issues, and it's obvious that someone has taken advantage of his condition to steal control of the company he built. These documents can't possibly be legitimate, and I demand that Global Tech postpone this acquisition until we can resolve this obvious fraud." Michael Rodriguez's expression shifted from confusion to professional alarm as he recognized the legal implications of Jackson's accusations. Claims of elder abuse or document fraud represented serious allegations that could expose Global Tech to significant liability if they proceeded with an acquisition based on disputed ownership claims. The careful due diligence process that Rodriguez had followed was designed to prevent exactly these types of complications from derailing major transactions. I had anticipated this reaction and came prepared with comprehensive documentation that would satisfy any reasonable legal review. Jennifer had helped me assemble a complete record of Robert Morrison's decision-making process, including medical evaluations, confirming his mental competency witnesses, to his signature on the transfer documents, and a detailed personal letter explaining his motivations for changing the ownership structure. "I understand your concern about the timing of these changes," I responded, maintaining the calm professional demeanor that Jennifer had recommended for this situation. "Mr. Rodriguez, I have complete documentation of the ownership transfer process, including medical certifications of Mr. Morrison's competency and detailed explanations of his decision-making rationale. Everything was handled with proper legal oversight to ensure complete transparency and legitimacy." Jennifer entered the conference room at that moment carrying a leather portfolio containing all the supporting documentation for the ownership transfer. Her presence immediately signaled to Global Tech's legal counsel that serious legal work had been involved in structuring the change in control rather than the hasty fraud that Jackson had alleged. Rodriguez would recognize Jennifer's reputation for thoroughness and ethical practice from her work on previous technology transactions in the Austin market. The documentation Jennifer presented included statements from two independent physicians confirming Robert Morrison's mental competency video recordings of Robert explaining his decision to transfer ownership and detailed financial analysis showing how Jackson's equity manipulation had violated the promises made to early employees. The evidence painted a clear picture of Jackson's systematic abuse of his position and Robert's reasoned response to protect the company's founding principles. More damaging to Jackson's credibility was evidence that he had misrepresented material facts about TechVantage's business during the acquisition negotiations. Jennifer had identified several instances where Jackson claimed responsibility for customer relationships and strategic initiatives that had been developed years before his operational involvement. These misrepresentations could have exposed Global Tech to liability if they had completed the acquisition based on inaccurate information about the company's competitive position. David Chen and Sarah Williams began asking pointed questions about Jackson's role in developing the business capabilities that had attracted Global Tech's acquisition interest. When confronted with specific evidence about the timeline of product development and customer acquisition, Jackson's responses became increasingly contradictory and defensive. It became obvious to everyone present that his claims about strategic leadership had been significantly exaggerated. The most devastating revelation came when Marina attempted to support Jackson's narrative by defending the marketing strategies that had attracted Global Tech's attention. Under questioning from Sarah Williams about customer acquisition costs and retention metrics, Marina was forced to admit that the most effective programs had been implemented before her arrival at TechVantage. Her attempts to take credit for my work had been thoroughly documented, creating an additional layer of credibility problems for Jackson's team. Rodriguez recognized that proceeding with the acquisition under these circumstances would be legally and professionally irresponsible. The discovery of ownership disputes, potential fraud allegations, and material misrepresentations about business operations created unacceptable risks for Global Tech's shareholders. He advised David Chen that the transaction should be postponed pending resolution of the ownership questions and verification of all claims about TechVantage's business performance. Jackson's reaction to this postponement revealed the full scope of his poor judgment and lack of professional maturity. Rather than accepting responsibility for the problems he had created, he began making increasingly desperate threats about legal action and personal consequences for anyone who interfered with his plans. His behavior demonstrated exactly why Robert Morrison had concluded that Jackson lacked the character necessary to lead a company built on ethical principles. The meeting concluded with Global Tech's team withdrawing from the immediate acquisition discussions while requesting additional time to evaluate the situation. Rodriguez made it clear that any future transaction would require my approval as the majority shareholder and would involve completely new due diligence to verify the accuracy of all previous representations about TechVantage's business operations. As Jackson and Marina left the conference room, their humiliation was complete. Everything they had worked toward over the past 2 years had collapsed because of Jackson's fundamental misunderstanding of corporate governance and his systematic abuse of early employees. The acquisition they had viewed as their personal triumph had become a professional disaster that exposed their lack of integrity to potential business partners. The resolution of TechVantage's acquisition situation required several weeks of careful negotiation, but ultimately resulted in an outcome that exceeded my most optimistic expectations. Global Tech's leadership team, despite their initial concerns about the ownership complications, recognized the genuine value of TechVantage's technology platform and customer relationships. Their primary concern had been ensuring that any transaction partner demonstrated the integrity and competence necessary for successful long-term collaboration. David Chen requested a series of private meetings where I could present the authentic history of TechVantage's development and address the misrepresentations that Jackson had made during earlier negotiations. These conversations revealed that Global Tech's strategic interest in TechVantage had always been based on the innovative approaches to cybersecurity that I had actually developed, not the generic growth strategies that Jackson had claimed as his own contributions. The corrected acquisition terms reflected a much more equitable distribution of proceeds among all stakeholders who had contributed to TechVantage's success. Instead of the heavily skewed allocation that Jackson had negotiated to benefit himself and his associates, the new structure provided meaningful compensation for early employees whose equity stakes had been systematically devalued through his restructuring efforts. Robert Morrison's recovery had progressed to the point where he could participate directly in finalizing the transaction terms. His involvement provided additional validation of my authority to represent TechVantage's interests and ensured that the acquisition honored his original vision for rewarding employees who had risked their careers to help build the company. Robert expressed profound satisfaction that his decision to transfer ownership had prevented Jackson from destroying the careers of people who had been loyal to TechVantage through years of challenging growth. The financial outcome exceeded all previous expectations. Global Tech's revised offer valued TechVantage at $420 million, reflecting their increased confidence in the company's leadership and their desire to secure a successful integration. My 51% ownership stake resulted in a personal payout of over $200 million while ensuring that other equity holders received fair compensation for their contributions. More importantly, the acquisition terms included retention packages and leadership roles that recognized the expertise of TechVantage's founding team members. Global Tech offered me the position of Senior Vice President for Cybersecurity Strategy, with responsibility for developing security solutions across their entire product portfolio. Several other early employees received promotions and compensation packages that reflected their actual contributions to the company's success. Jackson's behavior during the final stages of the acquisition process confirmed Robert Morrison's assessment of his character and judgment. Rather than accepting responsibility for his mistakes and attempting to salvage his professional reputation, Jackson continued making threats and accusations that further damaged his credibility with potential employers in the technology industry. His inability to acknowledge the legitimate interests of other stakeholders demonstrated exactly why he had been unsuitable for leadership responsibility. Marina's association with Jackson's failed leadership approach effectively ended her career prospects in the Austin technology community. Her willingness to support misrepresentations about company history and her systematic attempts to undermine early employees had become widely known among industry professionals. The cybersecurity sector's relatively small network of senior executives ensured that her reputation for ethical lapses would follow her to any future employment opportunities. The integration of TechVantage into Global Tech's operations proceeded smoothly under my leadership, with customer retention rates exceeding 95% and employee satisfaction remaining high throughout the transition period. The cultural alignment between TechVantage's collaborative approach and Global Tech's emphasis on innovation created synergies that justified the premium valuation they had paid for the acquisition. My role at Global Tech expanded rapidly as senior executives recognized my expertise in developing cybersecurity solutions for mid-sized businesses. Within 6 months of the acquisition closing, I was promoted to Executive Vice President with responsibility for a product portfolio generating over $1 billion in annual revenue. The leadership opportunities that Global Tech provided exceeded anything I could have achieved by remaining with an independent TechVantage. Most satisfying was the recognition that my decision to fight for equity justice had protected not just my own interests, but the financial security of dozens of employees who had contributed to TechVantage's success. The acquisition proceeds enabled these colleagues to achieve personal financial goals that would have been impossible under Jackson's proposed transaction structure. Several team members used their payouts to start their own companies, while others invested in advanced education or purchased homes for their families. The experience taught me that workplace injustice often persists because victims assume they lack the power to challenge systematic abuse. Jackson's manipulation of the equity compensation system had succeeded for years because early employees didn't understand their legal rights or have access to resources necessary for effective resistance. My business school education and professional network provided advantages that many workers don't possess, but the fundamental principle applies universally. Documentation, legal knowledge, and strategic thinking can overcome even significant power imbalances. The most important lesson involved recognizing that ethical leadership requires defending the interests of all stakeholders, not just maximizing personal benefit. Robert Morrison's decision to transfer ownership demonstrated that true business success comes from building organizations that reward everyone who contributes to collective achievement. Jackson's focus on personal advancement at the expense of early employees ultimately destroyed his credibility and prevented him from achieving his own objectives. Looking back on this experience, I realized that the skills that served me best were patience, careful planning, and the wisdom to seek expert advice when facing complex legal challenges. Emotional confrontation with Jackson would have accomplished nothing positive, while systematic documentation and strategic revelation of the ownership situation created leverage that protected everyone's interests. My current role at Global Tech provides opportunities to influence cybersecurity strategy for thousands of businesses worldwide, expanding the impact of innovations that began during those early years at TechVantage. The financial security from the acquisition allows me to take strategic risks and pursue ambitious projects without concern about short-term career consequences. Most importantly, I work for an organization that genuinely values collaboration and ethical leadership, creating an environment where talented people can achieve their professional potential. The transformation from marginalized employee to senior executive demonstrates that fighting for justice, even when the odds seem overwhelming, can produce outcomes that exceed your most optimistic expectations. Jackson's systematic abuse of power contained the seeds of his own destruction, but only because I chose to document his behavior and seek legal remedies rather than accepting unfair treatment as inevitable. For anyone facing similar workplace injustice, the key insight is that knowledge and preparation are more powerful than anger or resignation. Understanding your legal rights, documenting problematic behavior, and building strategic alliances can overcome even significant institutional advantages that abusers possess. The courage to challenge unfair treatment combined with professional legal guidance can transform apparent defeat into decisive victory. The cybersecurity industry continues to grow rapidly as businesses recognize the critical importance of protecting their digital assets from increasingly sophisticated threats. My role at Global Tech positions me to help develop solutions that will protect millions of companies and their customers from cyber attacks that could devastate their operations. The work provides personal fulfillment that goes far beyond financial compensation, knowing that innovations we develop today will safeguard economic activity and personal privacy for years to come. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone in authority was taking credit for your work or systematically undermining your contributions to an organization? How did you handle that challenge, and what advice would you give to others facing similar workplace injustice? Please share your experiences in the comments below, and remember to like this video if you found Sandra's story inspiring. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming workplace challenges and achieving professional justice, and share this video with anyone who might be facing similar struggles in their career. Thank you for listening to Sandra's journey from marginalized employee to senior executive, and I hope her experience provides encouragement and practical insights for your own professional challenges. Remember that documentation, legal knowledge, and strategic thinking can overcome even significant power imbalances when you have the courage to fight for what's right.